The true horrors of military hazing. Hazing is a tried, tested, and plain awful ritualistic practice that takes place in all branches of the military all across the world. Military hazing is when fellow comrades or commanding officers force others in uniform to go through horrific and humiliating events under the guise of training, often ignored and brushed under the carpet, even when the results and ramifications have been truly horrific, from psychological suffering to actual death. Hazing is now banned, and the United States military has a zero-tolerance policy toward it, although that doesn't prevent it from taking place. Those caught, however, can face severe punishment, including discharge, or in the most severe cases, dishonorable discharge and imprisonment. But what actually is hazing? Despite being seen as all in good fun by some, hazing is a very real and dangerous problem. It often hides under the guise of being a way to welcome newbies into the fold, as an initiation rite or ceremony that all must endure, but in reality can have far more sinister undertones. In 2018, the United States undertook its first ever Pentagon-wide survey on hazing. The report found that 9 out of 10 hazing reports came from the Marine Corps. That's 90% of all cases of hazing across the entire U.S. military. The Marines were followed by the Navy, then the Army, and finally the Air Force. Of the complaints examined, the hazing was divided into physical, verbal, psychological, nonverbal, and written abuse. This 2018 survey also suggests the number of hazing complaints examined is a vastly incorrect number, with the actual amount of hazing potentially stretching into the tens of thousands. That's because things such as informal hazing complaints weren't taken into account, not to mention the potential underreporting by the victims themselves. Even more recently, in 2023, a study published by the Journal of American Medical Association Psychiatry found that military hazing led to an increased risk of suicidal thoughts, a higher chance of PTSD and depression, and an increased likelihood of violent behavior. Given their careers, an increased likelihood of developing mental health issues. Anyway, hazing just adds the cherry on top for these poor men and women who have been subjected to it. First-hand accounts of hazing can be quite horrific, and in some cases, these practices have even resulted in the death of the victim of hazing. In other cases, there are first-hand accounts of soldiers being duct-taped, held upside down, and dunked repeatedly in water on their birthdays, or the act of blood winging, where they pound newly trained cadets' badges into their chests so the pin goes straight into the skin, or the more extreme cases of ripping off a soldier's underwear to expose them before hitting them repeatedly in their most sensitive of areas. But one of the worst examples of widespread and malicious hazing comes from Parris Island, a Marine Corps recruit depot in South Carolina. It's recognized as one of the places in the Corps where hazing was most systemic, and in many ways the most horrific. Recruits were forced to strip naked and run back and forth before being jammed against shower walls, suffering frequent abuse from drill instructors, and in some cases were even found to suffer chemical burns that were so severe they required skin grafts. But the worst offender was one Joseph Felix, a gunnery sergeant and instructor at Parris Island. Felix allegedly liked to single out Muslim men for his hazing rituals. Among racially motivated statements, he slapped, hit, and choked recruits, and even forced one into an industrial dryer, not letting him out until he said he was no longer Muslim. Other alleged incidents included forcing Muslim recruits to simulate beheading, calling them terrorists or ISIS as they did so. It was purely and simply racially motivated hate crimes under the guise of instruction and military hazing. Eventually, Felix's hazing cruelty took one deadly step too far in 2016. Raheel Siddiqui was just 20 years old, and a fairly fresh recruit who suffered from a sore throat during his first weeks at Parris Island's boot camp. When he asked to visit the sickbay and was unable to give Felix his appropriate morning greeting, the sergeant retaliated by ordering him to instead run multiple sprints across the squad bay. Due to being ill, Siddiqui collapsed, and in response Felix slapped him, leading to Siddiqui to get up and run out of the door to a stairwell, where he tragically went over the railing, falling 38 feet onto concrete. He did not survive. Although his death was later ruled a suicide, his family felt that the hazing and cruel behavior of Felix was to blame for his death, and the court somewhat agreed, concluding that maltreatment directly contributed to Siddiqui's death. Felix was sentenced to 10 years in prison for his crimes on Parris Island. Joseph Felix is one of the most recent examples of what can go wrong during hazing, but he's not alone. In 2005, a group of airmen took part in ritual hazings in Germany known as the one-hitter quitter, where people were knocked out in one punch and jump in, where 6 of the group would assault a new member for 6 minutes. Leading the charge, Rico Williams led a jump-in hazing on Purple Heart recipient Sergeant Ewan Johnson. Later that night, Johnson collapsed from his injuries and died in hospital. In another case that proves hazing is still very much alive in the military, a special warfare operator, Chief Tony Didolph, and 3 others wanted to attack and humiliate Green Beret Logan Melgar after he ditched them during a night of drinking. This case has also been described as a murder because Melgar had caught them hiring prostitutes and skimming funds. Their plan was to break into his room and render him unconscious before using duct tape and filming him in a compromising position. But things went tragically wrong after they realized they couldn't wake Melgar, who had sadly died from the chokehold Didolph administered. Didolph was initially given 10 years behind bars for his actions that night. While Felix Williams and Didolph's actions may be an extreme example of hazing, it serves to highlight what can happen in a culture where degradation and humiliation are considered an almost ritualistic part of service. While it can be seen as all in good fun and a way to accept another into the fold, it does far more harm than good. Arguments that it's a tradition and isn't meant cruelly doesn't work on those who take it too far, and harmless jibes can quickly turn into more sinister hazing activities like the destruction of property, forced acts of service, threats, or sexual assault. When the no big deal hazing-like name calling and sillier rituals occur, it perpetuates the systemic issue that leads to the extreme and cruel acts committed under the same guise. While some will claim hazing no longer takes place, court cases, studies, and reports all show this is to the contrary. Strong combatants who insist otherwise show that there's still a dissonance between what is and isn't considered hazing, and that the issue isn't as widespread or prevalent as it has been in the past. How the military is trying to prevent hazing. In 2018, the Department of Defense issued a new prevention and response program to address the need for leadership commitment and accountability. In 2020, this was updated to add responsibilities for the 43 states and territories of the non-federalized National Guard, and to state that leaders at all levels must be held accountable for creating an atmosphere of inclusion free from harassment. As part of this, the Army introduced an updated Not My Squad awareness campaign, developed new data collection and tracking methods, refined reporting procedures and investigation times, and worked on improving annual training and accountability measures. All this shows that despite the military's checkered past with hazing, in the last 5 years in particular, great strides have been taken to reduce the likelihood of hazing in all its branches. Despite that, as shown by recent reports, hazing has not been eradicated and continues to play a significant role in the U.S. military, indicating even greater measures are required, as was said by the Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, in 1997. Treating each other with dignity and respect is essential to morale, operational readiness, and mission accomplishment. Hazing is contrary to these goals. At Simple History, we've been working with talented artists on something truly special, a collection of official premium wall art that captures history's most incredible characters. These aren't just amazing pieces of art. They're timeless treasures designed to inspire and spark conversations for years to come. As a thanks to you, our amazing Simple History community, we're offering an exclusive 25% off these prints. Unlike fleeting trends or short-lived crazes, these prints are designed to be timeless, a lasting treasure you'll proudly display for years to come. They're perfect for any space. Imagine them on the walls of a classroom, where they'll inspire students and spark meaningful discussions. Or picture them in your home or office, where they'll show off your love of history with sophistication. Don't miss your chance to own one. Click the link in the description below now.